Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. His Excellency Ary Quintella, Ambassador of Brazil to Malaysia. His Excellency Dr. Ivan Vladimir Starcevic, Ambassador of Croatia to Malaysia. Mr. Timo Guzman, Deputy Head of Mission, Delegation of the European Union to Malaysia. Mr. Daniel Rahman, CEO of Asian Strategy and Leadership Institute, ASLI. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening and welcome to the first edition of ASLI Diplomatic Dynamic Series with the topic of From BRICS to ASEAN, Brazil and Malaysia's Global Leadership in Uncertain Times. I am Anas Hayyan, analyst from ASLI, and it's my pleasure to be your host today. For everyone's information, the Diplomatic Dynamic Series is ASLI's latest monthly knowledge platform aimed at fostering discussions on the latest diplomatic issues, particularly within ASEAN and Malaysia. This initiative brings together senior diplomatic figures, policymakers, researchers, and members of the public to engage in meaningful conversations on global challenges, regional cooperation, as well as Malaysia's role in international diplomacy vis-à-vis her 2025 ASEAN Chairmanship. Ladies and gentlemen, today's event will begin with an opening remark by the CEO of ASLI, Daniel Rahman, followed by a presentation from His Excellency Ary Quintella and a moderated Q&A with Mr. Daniel Rahman. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Daniel Rahman to deliver an opening remark.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being with us today, Excellency Ary Quintella. Yes, to get the pronunciation right. A good friend who, well, we're just talking about it. We met about just a year ago, but it feels like it's been a lot longer. Yeah, so thank you so much for accepting our invite today. I'll just do a very brief introduction. So, of course, the Asian Strategy and Leadership Institute, we are 32 years old this year, and we are very much committed to, as it says here, empowering leaders and advancing societies. So, as Anas has mentioned, today's diplomatic series is about bringing the diplomatic community closer to like-minded individuals such as you. So I won't say too much because I believe that we're all here to listen to what Ambassador Ary has to share. I do hope you will take notes, think about questions that you will ask. Ambassador Ary will do a bit of sharing for the first 15 or 20 minutes and give us an update of what's been happening. The BRICS space, the Brazil, Malaysia, ASEAN relationship has been a very exciting, very interesting one. It will then be followed with a bit of Q&A by me, and I promise to be nice. As nice as possible.
It was the deal, right? If he would be nice.
Yeah. And he said yes because I said you can wear batik and jeans. So I suppose nice in that way, right? And then we will definitely open the floor to you to ask your burning questions. At the same time, just on a side note, we do have some refreshments on the side and the coffee bar is open. So feel free to satiate a bit of your hunger and your thirst as we go along. On that note, please join me in a round of applause for Ambassador Ary. And I shall now hand over the floor to Ambassador. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. As I would like to thank ASLI and in particular Mr. Daniel Rahman for this invitation. I see some friendly faces here today. I would like to mention in particular the Ambassador of Croatia and the Deputy at the mission of the delegation of the European Union to Malaysia and has just entered the room, Mr. Lim, who used to be the Ambassador of Malaysia to Brazil. Dato Lim, as a matter of fact. As Daniel mentioned, he and I met exactly a year ago in January last year when I gave a presentation to the Oxbridge Society, of which he is a member. And in that occasion, all the questions were incredibly kind and nice, except one question that was asked by Mr. Daniel Rahman. So I made him promise that today he would behave. Okay, let's see whether he fulfills his promise. I've been ambassador of Brazil to Malaysia for exactly 5 years. I arrived in January 2020. At the time, Mr. Dato Lim was the ambassador of Malaysia in Brazil. We used to know each other in Brasilia before I came here. And I'm about to leave Malaysia, actually. I'm leaving in exactly 2 weeks, 2 weekends. This has been a very exciting time for me, and I've been exceedingly happy in Malaysia. Malaysia has the the foreign diplomats who are here will surely agree with me. I know they will because I know them well. Malaysia is an incredible country because Malaysians are kind and very generous to foreigners and very receptive to foreigners, and that's not always the case in all countries in the world. So I've never met a foreigner who wasn't happy in Malaysia. Normally, Brazilian diplomats stay 3 years, 3.5 in their postings. I've been here 5 years, so I've been privileged and I've been really blessed to be able to stay so long. But my time is up. I'm leaving in 2 weeks, so this is probably the last public event I'm participating at. So I'd like to thank you for that, Daniel. So a lot happened in relations between Brazil and Malaysia in these years while I was here, especially in the last 3 years after COVID, after 2 years of constant MCOs. And I have to tell you that even I arrived just before COVID, and even then I was very happy in Malaysia. Because in fact, during COVID, Malaysia was an exceptionally safe place to be. So as a foreigner, I felt very safe and very protected here in Malaysia because of the MCOs. So even during COVID, I have only fond memories of my time in Malaysia. So Fabio, let's move on. Fabio is a Brazilian diplomat who works with me at the embassy here. So I would like to start by mentioning that there is a coincidence at the moment that the two current governments in Brazil and Malaysia started nearly simultaneously, because Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim became the Prime Minister of Malaysia in November 22, and President Lula became President of Brazil again in January 23. And there are many similarities between them in terms of the way they see the world, in terms of how they want to position Brazil and Malaysia in the world, how they see the global south, and their personal histories has some similarities. This is a picture, this is Lula when he was an union leader before he became a politician. That's a picture from the 80s, I believe, or early 90s. And this is Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim when he was sent to prison. And Lula also had to go to prison for 2 years between his 2 terms as president for political reasons. So obviously, the fact that the 2 leaders started their terms in office almost simultaneously, and that they share so many characteristics and visions, helps our work here at the embassy, because there's a good synergy between them. So let's move on. For all diplomats, all the time you're thinking, how can I make my country better known? But if you look at the map, the distance between Brazil and Malaysia could not be bigger. We're talking about 16,000 kilometers of distance between them. So all the time, as the ambassador of Brazil, I wake up thinking, how can I make Brazil better known in Malaysia? How can I make Brazil and Malaysia closer? And so, as a diplomat, what do? You try to identify areas where you can work with the country where you're posted. And then, when I arrived in 2020, relations between Brazil and Malaysia were mostly trade and investment. Malaysia has become, in the last few years, an exceedingly important trade partner of Brazil. Brazil exports more goods to Malaysia than to most Latin American or European countries. That is pretty amazing, especially considering the distance between them. So we sell more to Malaysia than we sell to Peru, to Colombia, to Venezuela, to Portugal, to Spain, to France. This is amazing. But in my opinion, that wasn't enough. I thought that relations needed to go beyond trade. So how do you go? You want to expand trade and investment, but you also want to go beyond that. You want to articulate new areas where you can act in order to make the two countries closer. So in last year, Malaysia was, we have a trade, Brazil has a very large trade surplus with Malaysia. And in fact, Malaysia was last year our 9th largest trade surplus. The difference between what Brazil exports to Malaysia and what it imports is huge. It's Malaysia in the world. This is data for the world. Malaysia is Brazil's the 17th destination for exports and 29th in terms of origin of imports to Brazil. And last year, our trade was nearly 6 billion. It's a 6% increase from 2023 and a 34% increase since 2020, the year I arrived. This is not the highest volume of trade that we've had, the two countries. In 22, it went beyond 6 billion, but that was an exceptional year. So this is very good. If you consider the distance between the two countries, 5.87 billion, nearly $6 billion in trade is a lot. So let's move on, Fabio. So what are the new areas of cooperation that we've been developing at the embassy here between Brazil and Malaysia? The most obvious one, in my opinion, is environmental and climate change. It was always striking to me that two tropical countries, mega diverse countries, with a significant forest coverage in their territories, had very little dialogue in relation to the environment. And that's something I tried to change here after I arrived. And that has been a particularly successful effort, because the current Minister of the Environment of Malaysia, Nick Nazmi, gradually became reasonably close to our Minister of the Environment in Brazil, Marina Silva, who is a striking figure in the history of the environmental movement in the world. And we've managed to create a good relation between them, and that has helped a lot. So last year, Brazil was chairing the G20, and in the end we invited Malaysia, we invited Dato' Seri Anwar Ibrahim to come to Rio for the summit of the G20 in November. But even before that, even before we invited Malaysia to participate in the G20 summit, Malaysia is not a member of the G20. We invited Malaysia to participate in two G20 initiatives that Brazil created for the G20 meetings last year: the Bioeconomy Initiative and the Environmental and Climate Sustainability Working Group. The fact that we invited Malaysia to participate in the works of those two groups indicates the effort to make the two countries closer in their discussions about the environment. And in 2023, August, if I remember correctly, August 23, Brazil hosted a meeting, a summit in the Amazon region, in Belém, which is a big city in the mouth of the Amazon, where, by the way, this year, COP30 is going to take place. But in August 23, Brazil hosted a summit of the Amazon countries in Belém. And in that summit, we issued a declaration called Unite for Our Forests, meaning tropical forests. And after that declaration, Indonesia wanted from the start to join, and the two Congos also. So besides the country of the Amazon, the two Congos and Indonesia joined the declaration. Those were original signatories of the declaration. The very first country who was not an original signatory of the declaration, that decided to join the declaration, was Malaysia. So Malaysia joined the United for Our Forest declaration, and we consider that a particularly auspicious initiative on the part of Malaysia in relation to incrementing dialogue with Brazil in the field of the environment. More recently, Brazil launched the Tropical Forests Forever initiative, which is a new initiative about saving, protecting tropical forests. And Malaysia decided to participate in that initiative, and in fact, Malaysia is one of the countries that are going to be in the executive board of that initiative. So in terms of the environment and climate change, things are going very smoothly. And by the way, if you buy Nick Nazmi's new book, Saving the Planet, I'm one of the people he has to write a comment on, you know, when you have those comments in the books, blurbs for the book. I'm the author of one of the blurbs, and I was incredibly proud that Nick Nazmi asked me to write one of the blurbs for his books. Another very important area is energy, because the three main Malaysian investors in Brazil are all in the field of energy, because those are Petronas, Inson, and Sapura. Petronas, in fact, has become one of the main providers of energy in Brazil. But we are happy that now Malaysian firms are also interested in renewable sources of energy in Brazil. So Inson, for example, is already investing in wind energy in Brazil. And we are hoping that Gentari, which is the branch of Petronas dealing with renewable sources of energy, will also invest in Brazil. Science, technology, and innovation. Another coincidence is that Brazil and Malaysia launched their new their new master plans for industry almost simultaneously. And that have helped us in creating very important dialogue in the field of semiconductors. I've tried to make Brazil and Malaysia talk more about science and technology, but so far the area within science and technology which is really working in a very dynamic way between the two countries is semiconductors. In February last year, President Lula and Dato' Seri Anwar Ibrahim had a phone conversation. And when the phone conversation ended, the press release that Brazil issued about that conversation, they talked about all kinds of areas, but the area that was focused the most in the press release published by the Brazilian government was semiconductors. When last year the think tank of our Foreign Affairs Ministry published a book about ASEAN, how relations between Brazil and ASEAN were going. And each of the Brazilian embassies in ASEAN countries, we have embassies in all ASEAN countries, with the exception of Brunei. I'm also the ambassador to Brunei and Laos. And all embassies of Brazil in ASEAN member countries were asked to choose someone to write about a particular chapter for that book. And for Malaysia, our think tank, Funagi, wanted the Malaysian author to write about semiconductors. And that in itself is very interesting, because our think tank would have asked the Malaysian author to write about all kinds of different subjects of interest within ASEAN. But we wanted Malaysia to write the book on semiconductors, the chapter on semiconductors for that book. And I invited Mr. Rafizi Ramli to write about that chapter. He accepted. So the only minister in the book, of all ASEAN countries, the only minister in the book is the Ministry of the Economy of Malaysia, Minister Rafizi, who writes about semiconductors. And all kinds of, last year for the first time, Brazil participated in Semicon fair, the first time, and it happened in Kuala Lumpur. That was the first time ever that we had a booth in that fair. And global health. I'm very lucky because, in fact, relations between Brazil and Malaysia had gained such a momentum that 2 years ago I was able to increment my staff at the embassy, or diplomats at the embassy, by 50%. And that allowed me to create an impetus for these new subjects to be dealt with, because before that, I simply did not have the manpower at the embassy to dedicate to all these new areas. But 2 years ago, we received 2 new diplomats at the embassy, 2 new places at the embassy were created for them. And one of them came from a mission to Geneva, and he has expertise in the field of health. And that was very helpful to me because that's an area where the potential for Brazil and Malaysia to cooperate is very clear. Tropical countries suffering from the same tropical diseases. So these are areas which we've managed to implement in the last 2-3 years, going, as I said, beyond trade and investment. And don't worry, we will get to BRICS and ASEAN. And again, an ambassador wakes up every day thinking, what can I do? What can I do today? What initiative can I launch? How do I make my country better known? I remember that Croatia, for example, 2 years ago, if I remember correctly, at their National Day, they brought Croatian singers singing old Croatian songs, very old songs, a cappella, without musical instruments. So that was very beautiful. And suddenly, by listening to that, you had the whole tradition and culture of Croatia just thrust upon you. You could see it very vividly. That's what an ambassador does every day. Think of new ways to how can I be more present. The European Union has financial resources that a country like Brazil does not have. The European Union cooperates with Malaysia in all kinds of programs and activities. Those are financial resources that are not available to me as the Brazilian ambassador. So sometimes we need to be really creative. Last year, I fulfilled a dream I had had ever since I arrived here. Nobody knows this, but KLCC Park, and I'm lucky because I live right across from KLCC Park. KLCC Park was designed by the most famous Brazilian landscaper in the 90s. That was, in fact, his last project before he died in his 80s. He was already ill when he was hired by KLCC Holdings to design the park. Even though he was dying, he came to Malaysia twice to be able to see the area. As some of you may know, before KLCC Park was created, that was a hippodrome. And the park is, in my opinion, KLCC Park, a very visual link between Brazil and Malaysia, because if you're Brazilian, when you go to that park, you can identify it as a work by Roberto Burle Marx. With one characteristic, however, he mostly used plants from Southeast Asia. So it's fascinating for us Brazilians because it's a park whose design is very characteristically Brazilian, but using plants that we don't have in Brazil, plants from Southeast Asia. So I wanted to have a book about that because I thought that that book would be a very visual reminder for people of the link between Brazil and Malaysia. And finally, at the beginning of last year, we were able to publish that book. That book was distributed to opinion makers, politicians, journalists in Malaysia, to a kind of reminder to them. Brazil is a distant country, but here it is. You have a little bit of Brazil right in the heart of Malaysia, in the heart of Kuala Lumpur, which is the park designed by this famous Brazilian landscaper. And then one thing, when I arrived here, we had Brazil participated, the Embassy of Brazil participated every year in the Latin American Film Festival. And I thought, well, Brazil is a country large enough, culturally rich enough, to merit its own film festival. So I decided that Brazil should have its own film festival. Go on participating in the Latin American Film Festival, but let's have our own film festival. And in 23, we launched the first ever Brazilian Film Festival in Kuala Lumpur. Last year, we had the second edition. And movies are a very good way to show to the other country, to the other people, what your society is like. There's nothing more visual, that creates more impact than a movie. Everybody loves American culture because we all grow up watching Hollywood movies. That's called soft power in the end. So that's why I wanted very much to have a Brazilian film festival so that people could see what Brazilians, contemporary movies, so that people could see what Brazilians are like, how they live, what they talk about. And that's what movies do. Good movies, I hope. We had all kinds of activities in 23, 24, about cultural activities. Our National Day is a very good way to show Brazilian culture because there are demonstrations of Brazilian music, Brazilian dance, Brazilian martial art, capoeira. Some of you may have heard of capoeira. So National Day receptions for an ambassador are godsend. If you have the money to organize a good National Day reception, it's a godsend because it gives you the chance to show some of your culture to the local public. Another aspect is talking to the press, talking to the media. And I have to say that last year, for me, was 24, was particularly tiring in that respect, because ever since that Ary Ibrahim announced on June 14th that he wanted Malaysia to join BRICS, the demand for me to talk about BRICS and what I thought about Malaysia joining BRICS was huge. And by the way, I'm in favor. So there were moments when I thought I was working as the government of Malaysia spokesperson, because I see that it's a perfectly legitimate aspiration on the part of Malaysia to be a member of BRICS. So I often write articles to be published in Malaysian papers. The Star is a paper I particularly enjoy reading, so it's my printed paper of choice because I just like that paper. So I occasionally write articles for them. I went to Breakfast Grill twice in 1 year. I went to ONE Global, and I published my foreign minister's articles on energy transition and Gaza in The Edge and The Star. Brazil's position about Gaza is pretty much the same as Malaysia. In fact, President Lula and Prime Minister Ary Ibrahim, in my opinion, are the two leaders who are the most vocal about what's happening in Gaza. And the book about Burle Marx awakened. Did I send you a copy of the book, Daniel? Did you have a copy of Burle Marx and Excellency Park? Oh, you good? Now the book, we had 600 copies printed, and they went very fast. But journalists who received copies of the book wrote about the book. And I had Petronas organized for me an event in August last year with the Malaysian media to talk about the book. And obviously, I took advantage of that, I have to be honest. I also talked a lot in that media event about relations between Brazil and Malaysia. So I went beyond just talking about the book. I wouldn't miss the chance of doing that, right? So, Fabio, let's move on. This is an interview I had with The Edge TV. And that was a gift that The Edge gave me, frankly, because a journalist from The Edge TV came to the embassy, interviewed me for half an hour, Nadia Hassan, and then she did something very well done. She transformed my interview of 30 minutes into a 7-minute piece on relations between Brazil and Malaysia. And she went into archives, she got all kinds of pictures of Brazil to illustrate, and they had video footage of several events. I didn't even know that, but they had video footage of several events the embassy had organized a few months before. And Datuk, how are you? I'm honored to have you here today. We have Datuk Mustafa here today. And that was an amazing piece, and you can see it on the site of The Edge TV, bringing Malaysia and Brazil closer together. And that was so well done, in fact, that when our colleagues at the Foreign Ministry in Brazil learned about this, some of them wrote me saying, maybe nastily, how much did it cost you? How much did it cost the embassy to have that piece done? Because it's the best public relations piece about Brazil and Malaysia that you could have. And I said, absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. The Edge just came and interviewed me, and they did that piece, and it cost the embassy absolutely nothing. Let's move on, Fabio. So this is the cover of the book about Excellency Park and Burle Marx. This is a picture I took from my window of the towers and the park. You see how lucky I am? Let's move on, Fabio. So, last year, for several reasons, was a particularly dynamic year in relations between Brazil and Malaysia. As a matter of fact, I published different articles in the Star and in a Brazilian newspaper, but with the same about this, but about the articles were different, the text, but the title was the same. The title was The Turning Point, because I considered 2024 to have been a turning point. And there were in relations between the two countries, and there were reasons for that. Brazil last year was chairing G20, and this year it is chairing BRICS, and it's hosting COP30. And Malaysia this year is chairing ASEAN. So that made it clear to everyone in Brazil, and I hope in Malaysia too, that it was a good moment to make the two countries more connected. And so what happened last year, amongst other things, the year concluded with the visit of Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim to the G20 summit in Rio in November, and he also had a bilateral meeting with President Lula. And by the way, President Lula received around 30 leaders last year in November in Rio for the G20 summit. He simply did not have the time to have bilaterals. Malaysia was just one of 2 or 3 countries with which he accepted to have a bilateral meeting. Just before that, we had the first ever, we've had diplomatic relations since Malaysia became independent in the 50s, but we had never managed to have a political consultations meeting. And political consultations meetings between two countries are very important because that's when they sit down, diplomats from the two sides, sit down and discuss everything that's happening in their bilateral relations, but also in the world. And it's a very important means for the two countries to feel how the other country sees the world, crises that are happening in the world. So it was pretty amazing to me that the two countries had never had a political consultations meeting. And that was one of my dreams, to finally have the two countries have that meeting. And it took place last year in September. Yeah. And just before that, our foreign minister came to Malaysia. No Brazilian foreign minister had been to Malaysia since 2017, if I remember correctly. And at the same time, the Minister of Agriculture of Malaysia went to Brazil, had a meeting with the Brazilian Minister of Agriculture. And Yu Ting-tong, the MITI Vice Minister, went to Brazil in May. And Yu Ting-tong's visit to Brazil, in my opinion, was particularly important because when he went to Brazil in May last year, he paved the ground for many of the discussions that were going to take place along the year, culminating in the conversations between Lula and Anwar Ibrahim in Rio in November. Semiconductors and investments. Let's move on, Fabio. So that's Lula and Anwar Ibrahim at the G20 summit in Rio. And Malaysia wanted very much to participate in the G20 summit. And Malaysian officials asked me whether it would be possible for Malaysia to be invited. So I was very happy when Malaysia was invited to participate in the G20. The last time Malaysia participated in a G20 summit was many years ago when Malaysia was chairing ASEAN. Sometimes the G20 host invites the chair of ASEAN, but no, it's not compulsory. Malaysia last year was not yet chairing the G20, but I thought it was appropriate that he should participate, and he did. Malaysia wanted a bilateral meeting between Anwar Ibrahim and Lula. The bilateral meeting happened. As I said, Lula only had the time to have 2 or 3 of those bilaterals. One of them, 3 I think, one of them was with Malaysia. Malaysia wanted to have a joint communique after the meeting between Anwar Ibrahim and Lula. Brazil was opting not to issue communiques after those few bilaterals that Lula was going to have during the G20, but we accepted to have a joint communique with Malaysia. It was published. In turn, because of there was a round table. Anwar Ibrahim had a round table with the Brazilian and Malaysian business communities in Rio during the G20. And because of that, Inson participated in that visit to Brazil by the Prime Minister, and Inson had an event in Rio celebrating its investments in Brazil. And there was also a meeting between Malaysia and Brazil for semiconductors. Why suddenly has the semiconductor area become so important in relations between Brazil and Malaysia? Because we are talking about two developing countries which want to develop their semiconductor industry. Malaysia is possibly more advanced in Brazil. Malaysia has a more important role in the global chain of semiconductors than Brazil does. But Malaysia at the same time wants to change its participation in the global chain of semiconductors. It wants to have, instead of having foreign investments in the semiconductor field, it wants to have its own semiconductor industry, and Brazil is trying to develop its semiconductor industry. So what we decided was, we don't need to be competitors in this, because you might think two developing countries from the global south who want to develop the semiconductor industries, is that compatible, or are they going to be rivals? And we decided that we wanted to be partners, not rivals in this endeavor. Lula, during the G20, launched the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. All G20 members accepted to participate in that global alliance, and Malaysia decided to join too. There's a lot in common between Lula's social policies and Malaysia Madani. So it was perfectly natural, from my point of view, that Malaysia should join the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. An important thing that happened is that during the G20 summit, Dato' Seri Anwar Ibrahim invited President Lula to participate in the ASEAN summit this year in Kuala Lumpur. And Lula accepted immediately. And no Brazilian president has ever participated in an ASEAN summit. So that's going to be a first. Pode mudar? So this is the joint communique that was issued on November 17th, after they had Lula and Anwar Ibrahim their bilateral meeting. So I just highlighted a few things. It's a longish communique, but so I highlighted a few more important issues here. So for example, you have paragraph 5 talks about comprehensive reforms in global governance that take into account the aspirations of emerging and developing countries to play a greater role in international affairs. As I said, that's an aspiration that both Lula and Anwar Ibrahim share. Here you talk about Gaza on paragraph 6. And here in paragraph 7, you have a good roadmap on what the two countries could talk about more and more in the future. We are talking about health, halal industry. One thing that people in Malaysia don't know is that Brazil is a hugely important provider of halal animal protein. The trade of halal chicken, for example, Brazil alone is responsible for 50% of the trade in halal chicken in the world. So we're talking about health, halal industry, food security and agriculture, science, technology and innovation, semiconductors, and environment and climate change. Here we highlight that Malaysia decided to join the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. So let's move on. So what's happening here? Why suddenly all this interest between Brazil and Malaysia? So, as I said, several things. And Malaysia wants to join BRICS. Brazil is a founding member of BRICS. Brazil is the B in BRICS. Brazil is going to head the BRICS summit this year. Brazil is interested in ASEAN. The whole world is interested in ASEAN. In fact, in 2022, Brazil became sectoral dialogue partner of ASEAN. ASEAN has several categories for non-ASEAN member states who want to have a dialogue with ASEAN. The highest one is dialogue partner of ASEAN, which is what the European Union has with ASEAN, and United States, Russia, Japan, China, New Zealand, Australia, India, those are dialogue partners. Then you have sectoral dialogue partners. And Brazil in 2022 became one of those sectoral dialogue partners, meaning that we want to cooperate with ASEAN in specific areas, which are now being discussed between the ASEAN Secretariat in Jakarta and Brazil. So, Malaysia is interested in joining BRICS. Brazil wants to have a bigger dialogue with ASEAN. Brazil is going to chair BRICS. Malaysia is going to chair ASEAN. Brazil is going to chair COP30 in Belém. Malaysia is obviously one of the countries interested in what happens in the COP summits. Both are mega diverse countries. Both have the same position in relation to Gaza, the Ukraine. There's a strong convergence between Brazil and Malaysia in multilateral fora. We believe in that the international institutions have to be reformed, that countries from the global south have to have a bigger voice, a louder voice, a bigger participation in fora such as the UN Security Council, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. And there are challenges, very similar challenges, health. So it was just really a question of the work of the embassy was just to pinpoint to Brazil that there is this convergence. The momentum is there. So much is going to happen. Let's take advantage of this to promote better relations, closer relations with this country. This is more or less what I've just said. Move on. Finish? Okay. So that's what I wanted to say, and I'm open to any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, Ambassador Ary, for that most comprehensive, inspiring, and eye-opening presentation. You look at me a bit. I think he's looking at me. He's saying, what's the question that Daniel's going to start with? And I must say though that listening to Ambassador Ary's presentation is obviously very comprehensive, and so many questions are running through my mind right now. I suppose I will allow you one veto, or like 2 times you can say no to answering my question, and the rest you have to answer. Is that a fair deal?
Well, you know,
oh, look at the time.
No, I was going to say that the person who has asked me the most difficult question since I've been here 5 years is actually in the room, and that's Dato Mustafa. When
we like to acknowledge Dato Sri Mustafa Muhammad Topaz there. Yeah.
And he always asked me the most, every time I had a meeting with him, he always asked me the most important questions, actually, and the most direct ones. And you talk to him about an initiative, he would say, but how many jobs are going to be created? And, very to the point. So he beats you anytime, Daniel.
He beats me anytime, and I'm humbled to be beaten by Topaz difficult questions. So perhaps what I'll do is I will get the ball rolling. And because we have a big audience, I would like to then jump straight into audience questions and might intersperse in that sense. Now, I'm going to start with an easy question. Donald Trump.
Is that your easy question?
No. So,
go ahead.
Okay. So, the November 17 joint communique that you had shared earlier was quite far-sighted and quite revolutionary, if I may say. And if I may quote a little bit where both of Malaysia and Brazil's leaders had said, and I quote, they pledged to work together for a, quote, reinvigorated multilateral system rooted in the principles of the UN Charter and international law, a reformed global governance that is more representative, democratic, effective, transparent, and accountable, and a system that must reflect the social, economic, and political realities and predicaments. And as we have seen in your presentation as well, Malaysia and Brazil have a very similar stance on Gaza and the atrocities that we see around the world. Yet time and time again, it feels like the global community is consistently bullied by that one superpower. Do you disagree and agree with me? And because I know you will agree with me, but you can't say that out loud, the question is, what can our two countries do together to thwart the seemingly gloomy outlook that a Trump 2.0 approach might have on the global world order?
Well, it's interesting. But first of all, we have to take with caution what President Trump says, because President Trump, like many politicians, likes or maybe needs to make very strong statements to capture the attention of his public. But one thing is what you say, the other thing is what you actually do. But it is true that in the end, also often you hear Western commentators saying that China, for example, is jeopardizing the rules-based order, which is a very subjective concept. What are those rules? Who created those rules? But in the end, you might argue that it's for some countries in the West that the rules-based world is not working anymore. It's some Western countries that are changing the rules which they themselves created. You know, when Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim declared that Malaysia, he wanted Malaysia to be in BRICS, many Western ambassadors came to me and asked me, what do you think? Why does Malaysia want to join BRICS? Is BRICS anti-Western? Some Malaysian journalists asked me the same question. When Malaysia says that it wants to join BRICS, isn't it making an anti-Western stance? And I totally disagree with that. I don't think so. Because BRICS does not have the intention of subverting the rules-based order. What it wants is for the rules-based order to be more representative of the world as it is today. So I don't think that Malaysia, by wanting to join BRICS, is making an anti-Western stance. It's just saying, which, by the way, I think every country should wish to say and to do, any country in whatever continent, to have as many close relations with as many countries as possible. And I believe that that was the intention of Malaysia when it declared that it wanted to join BRICS.
Thank you. Happy to open straight to the floor. I've got one here. Can I take two at a time? So 1 and 2, please introduce yourself, and we'll start with the gentleman here. Do we have an extra mic by any chance? No. Or why did you just say your, do you think
My name is Danish. I hope everyone is able to hear me. My name is Danish. I have two short questions. Okay. Firstly, do you think, Your Excellency Ambassador, that with President Lula at helm, that the Brazilian foreign policy will now repivot more to the global south? Because that's what I noticed during his first presidency, pivoting to Africa, visiting African countries. That's number one. And number two, you're talking about this linkage. You have mentioned Brazil and Malaysia 16,000 kilometers apart. But one thing I've realized many years ago, in the 90s, the former airline Varig flew from Brazil, let's say from Rio to Bangkok and Hong Kong. Do you think, Your Excellency Ambassador, that we should look at establishing air links directly?
That would be... Oh.
Yes. Hi, Ashraf from Exim Bank, Export Import Bank. So, a few questions. First is there any possibilities of Malaysia Exim Bank, one of our Malaysian BFIs, to collaborate with Brazil National Development Bank, since we are having more collaborations, semiconductor and other industries as well. Second is, apart from semiconductor, there's another sector that Malaysia is trying to pursue more, which is aerospace. So I just learned about Embraer. So third biggest aerospace company. So Malaysia is still trying to pursue aerospace industry expansion. So I think there should be some potential collaboration Embraer and Malaysia. And third is more on service, soft power. Since Malaysia is extremely fanatic of football, we have some footballers in Malaysian clubs, Johor and other clubs. Is there any possibility of Brazilian clubs, Santos, Corinthians, Flamengo, to open up like a academy of collaboration? So it's a soft power, more soft relationship between Malaysia and Brazil. It's much more genuine.
You mentioned so many Brazilian clubs. You didn't mention mine, Botafogo. It's important to remember that Lula is not. Brazil traditionally has believes in dialogue. That's a tenet of our foreign policy. We don't believe in sanctions. We don't believe in wars. We believe in dialogue. And we believe that dialogue is the best way to solve conflicts. Lula definitely, from the time he was president the first time, he has a global South policy, that's for sure. But he never did neglected United States and Europe, ever. So yes, he's definitely interested. In his first term, he had a very strong policy for Africa. He's trying to do that again in his second term, with Africa in particular. He tried 2 years ago, as soon as he became president, he tried to relaunch a process of integration of South American countries. South America, for several reasons, is the only country, is the only region in the world that doesn't manage to have a proper integration process. North America has with NAFTA, Central America has it, the Caribbean has it, Europe has it, ASEAN has it, Africa has it with the African Union. South America, for all kinds of different reasons, doesn't manage to have that. And it's always Brazil which tries to launch, in particular when the Workers' Party is in power, tries to launch an integration process. It's very hard. But anyway, Lula definitely has a policy towards Africa, South America. Now he's having a very dynamic policy towards ASEAN countries. But that doesn't mean he's neglecting Europe or the United States. On the contrary, the trade agreement between Mercosur and the European Union was finally finalized a few months ago, last year. It took us 25, 30 years to negotiate that agreement. I know Malaysia is about to relaunch its negotiations with the European Union. Good luck. It's very tough. And it's very tough negotiating with them. And so the agreement was finalized last year under Lula's presidency. It's a Mercosur European Union, because Brazil, as a member of Mercosur, cannot negotiate trade agreements of its own. It has to be in the context of Mercosur. Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. So the conclusion of the trade agreement between Mercosur and the European Union by itself says a lot of Lula's interest in keeping good relations with the United States and Europe. I can guarantee you that Lula, for example, ideologically, Lula and Donald Trump are very different people. But you know, when Lula was first president, he had better relations with George W. Bush than with Obama. So it's a question of compatibility, a historical moment, compatibility, personalities, It doesn't have so much to do with ideology. So, and there was a second question, the linkages. Yes. In order for airlines to be interested in having direct flights to another country, there needs to be a public for the planes to be full, right? So hopefully we'll get to that. I know that in the past, Malaysia Airlines had a flight from KL to Buenos Aires, stopping in Cape Town. So it's feasible. It would have to be a very long flight. You know, from my front door here to my mother's front door in Rio, it's 30 hours. So obviously, if you cut the intermediate airport, if you have it's less than that, of course, but it's a very long trip. And about, you know, your question is interesting about Exim Bank, and because in last year at the Kazana forum, what's the name of the forum, Kazana? The Megatrends Forum. One of the directors of our National Economic and Development Bank, which is the one you mentioned, BNDES, was invited by Kazana to participate in a panel. And he had all kinds of meetings while he was here, including with Liu Qingtong, to discuss how his bank and Malaysia can have more intensive dialogue. As for the clubs, yes, it's, you know, there are many Brazilian players here in several clubs, Raw, Perak, KL City, Pahang, I think, Sarawak, Johor I mentioned. That was the first one. I know it's good for me. I mentioned Johor first, okay? So, but yes, we don't have a proper cooperation. But you know, Brazil is doing so bad at the World Cup. Maybe it would be better for Malaysia to have the cooperation from Croatia, who beat us at the last World Cup. So,
All right. But there's one more about apart from semicon aerospace. Yeah, the aerospace.
yes, Embraer. Embraer is the seat of Embraer for Asia is in Singapore. And they've been trying to enter the ASEAN market. And they've been selling both commercial airplanes and defense airplanes to some ASEAN countries, particularly Indonesia, I believe. 2 years ago at Lima, in Langkawi, Embraer signed a leasing agreement with Malaysian airline, but to lease 10 airplanes, commercial planes, to that Malaysian Airlines, because Embraer planes are the best for mid-range flights. But that airline is not doing very well financially. I won't say which airline that is. It's not Malaysia Airlines. It's not doing very well financially. So that agreement apparently is not going anywhere. But Embraer is doing its best. But obviously, it has to face a very tough competition on the part of Airbus, in Malaysia in particular.
All right, I'm going to ask a question next. When you arrived in 2020, which month was that? January. So it was still the Tun administration, Mahathir administration. So you have seen Tun Mahathir, Tan Sri Muhyiddin, Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri, and now Prime Minister Anwar. The next question is an easy one. Who's your favorite? No, I'm kidding. Half kidding. No, the question is this, actually. Having been in Malaysia, you're leaving in 2 weeks. Don't worry about it now. No, but you've been here 5 years now, and there have been many government policies in your time that have endeavored to make the lives of Malaysians better. Yet at the same time, we still see, some of you may agree, may disagree with me, perhaps rising conservatism, challenging economic situations and all that. Now, what do you see, however, as the positives? I want to talk about the positives of Malaysia. In the last 2 years, the Madani framework, because I believe in an interview you did about a year ago, you spoke about the Bolsa Familia policy that had lifted 30, 40 million Brazilians out of poverty during President Lula's first term. And we see, that happening now in Malaysia's governance. What are the 2 or 3 positive things that you see happening in Malaysia in the 5 years? And maybe tell us a little bit about why we should remain optimistic about this country that you're about to leave.
I'll answer by saying that I see no reason to be pessimistic, and I see no reason at all to be pessimistic. I think Malaysia is an incredibly blessed country in many respects. Sometimes I see even Malaysian commentators mentioning that since 2018, Malaysia has been living under political crisis. I don't see it at all like that. I think that what's been happening in Malaysia since 2018 is a very healthy evolution of democracy, because until 2018, you had basically, since independent, one party having the majority constantly, and that doesn't happen anymore, and probably it won't happen again, not in the near future, but that's very good. That's actually very good, because when you need to form coalitions, you need to make concessions, and you need to hear more people who are different from you, from different political parties, who think differently from you. So I think that coalitions in the end are very healthy for democracy. And in fact, Brazil, even though Brazil is a presidential system, whereas Malaysia has a parliamentary system, Brazil, under its presidential system, since the redemocratization of the country in '84, so 40 years, no president in Brazil has been able to govern without forming coalitions, because no president has had majority in Congress. And so I totally disagree when sometimes foreign ambassadors arrive and they come to visit me at the embassy and they say, do you think that Malaysia is still a good place for foreign investments, considering that it's living under a political crisis since 2018? And I totally disagree with that, totally disagree. I think it's a very stable, it's a very democratic country, very stable in its democracy. The fact that you have an alternate in power is incredibly healthy, and that's what you have in democratic countries, in fact. And the fact that coalitions need to be formed is very good for the health of the country. So I see no reason whatsoever to be pessimistic, frankly.
Thank you. I see some nodding faces, some smiles. Now, audience, back to you for those who have questions. Gentleman here, please, yes.
All right, thank you. I'm Sheikh Irfan from EU Chamber of Commerce. Okay, all right, from EU of Chamber of Commerce. So, Your Excellency just now mentioned that Malaysia participation in BRICS is not actually a testament towards anti-Western or anti-American stance. But of course, this is not exactly what the other side perceive as. The US does, feel threatened and willing even to impose 100% tariffs on BRICS and its members. So my question is that how exactly, we can navigate around the general concern that Southeast Asian countries' participation in BRICS could lead to the decline in ASEAN, especially on the centrality and the neutrality policy, and even countries like Philippines that have strong alliance with the US. So how could we navigate around this?
Yeah.
But did you notice that President Donald Trump's first statements were against the closer friends of the United States, against Mexico, against Canada, against Denmark in a way? President Trump, when he was present the first time, at his very first NATO summit in Brussels, in his speech, he declared, the European Union is the enemy of the United States. So I haven't seen him talk about Russia, China. So the other day, there was a funny, I was sent a very funny video. President Trump was in the Oval Office, and for some reason, he had a grudge against Spain. I don't know why he had a grudge against Spain, a very stalwart member of the European Union, but he said, and you know what? Spain is in BRICS, right? So they'll see what's going to happen to them because they're a member of BRICS. And Spain, of course, is not at all a member of BRICS. It's a member of the European Union, not of BRICS. It couldn't be a member of BRICS because it's a developed country.
The S is South Africa, not Spain.
Do you think that's why he thought Spain was a member? No, I can't see that that belonging to BRICS is a threat to any country that wants to join BRICS in relation to the United States. I don't see it that way.
So you think it's all smoke and mirrors on Trump's part, the threat that he's...
I think that the reality of life in the end has to present itself. And, in the end, what the backbone of his policies make America great again. And every leader wants that for their country. Which leader comes to the public and say, I don't want my country to be great again? So that's what every single president or prime minister or king wants, head of state or government, wants for their country. So he just wants to implement policies which, in his opinion, are the best ones for the United States. And what that means is that he's willing not to be so friendly with the usual friends of the United States if he considers that friendship at the moment is not compatible with what he wants for America. That doesn't mean that he has an anti-Spanish stance or an anti-Canadian stance. Is that at that particular moment in time, he thinks that bilateral relationship has to change.
All right. Thank you. Any... Yep.
Hi, I'm Nusaiba. I'm a government affairs consultant at Rins and Partners. I guess when it comes to the issue of Malaysia joining BRICS, the usual reason that Malaysia gives is economic benefits. And I was wondering what more can Malaysia gain from joining BRICS apart from existing FTAs and bilaterals that Malaysia already has with countries in BRICS?
Yes, that was a question that was often asked of me by Western ambassadors here when Anwar Ibrahim announced that he wanted Malaysia to join BRICS. Whether joining BRICS is necessary to have close economic relations with the BRICS members. Obviously, the answer is no. You don't have to join BRICS to have good and deep economic and trade relations with the members of BRICS. However, when we talk about BRICS, people, when they think about BRICS, they often think in terms of the summits of BRICS, right? And you see pictures of Modi, Lula, Xi Jinping gathering and Putin and talking. But BRICS goes well beyond that. In any year, before the BRICS summit, you have over 100 meetings within BRICS, or in all kinds of areas of activities. You have the Business People Forum, which gathers more or less simultaneously with the Leaders Summit. You have cultural meetings, you have museum exchanges, you have all kinds of educational programs. And I think that BRICS, what it does is create constant opportunities for the societies of all the member countries to get to know each other better. So that's how I would answer your question, which is a very pertinent question, because it's something that is always on people's mind. But why does Malaysia need to join BRICS if already China is one of its main trade partners? If it already imports so much from Brazil, if it's already so close to India, why does Malaysia need to join BRICS? But it goes beyond trade and investment. BRICS promotes, facilitates better acquaintanceship with those other countries, which in the end also helps with investment and trade.
If I may jump in, however, Ambassador, I don't think you can deny that the existence of BRICS is also, as in that statement, to create a different, not necessarily a new world order or a different world order, but one that is fairer. And one of the reasons I've actually posed this question to the Director General of the World Trade Organization, and I said, what do you think of Trump's threat of the tariffs? And her response was, the threats are in relation to the creation of a new currency, a BRICS currency. And she says, it's very unlikely that that's going to happen, right? But we see that threat or the fear also comes from perhaps the weakening of an existing world order. And when we talk about an economic order, when we talk about a social, cultural, historical order, even a geopolitical one has to accept that there is an insecurity or even a defensiveness to want to protect the current order that we see. Hence, BRICS is deemed as a threat to what is seen, quote unquote, as normal. I mean, look, it's like once upon a time when PM Anwar was, before the BRICS announcement, he was heralded as the shining light of leadership, from a Western media lens. The moment he announced BRICS, suddenly, there was, I remember, was it a New York Times, an Economist headline, or one of those magazines that said, oh, look, the West keeps banking on good leaders and they keep turning on us. That kind of a narrative. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, definitely. President Trump has been mentioning the BRICS currency a lot. I don't know where that idea came from. I know that in the past, someone talked about, let's see if we can have a common currency within BRICS, but that's definitely not on the table. You don't see at any BRICS summit leaders saying, oh yeah, in year such, we aim to have a common currency. Nobody's thinking about that within BRICS, not seriously. So that's not a real threat to the American economy. BRICS countries, like several other countries, including Malaysia, want to have, if possible, more and more bilateral trade in local currencies. But, the proportion so far is so minimal that... No, I think even China, which maybe is the country most advanced in that, I think only 10% of its trade is in local currencies. So that's definitely not a threat to the US dollar.
I suppose, put another way, we've seen over time different blocs emerge and disappear. I think there was one called, was it the G8? Not the one with Bangladesh in it. And after the turmoil that we saw last year, the chair was Bangladesh, and now that's sort of gone very quiet. And blocs always tend to emerge to try to represent regional interests of different groups. Do you see this as, I suppose, from your background in diplomacy and sort of historical context, this is just part of the way countries who feel they may not have a voice or represent a voice of a certain population of the world group together and say, please, we should be heard?
Well, last year, a European ambassador, who is not present here today, told me, in the European Union, we don't care about BRICS. We don't even have the time to read the annual statement by the BRICS countries, etc. And I told that ambassador, I simply don't believe you. I don't believe that European Commission is not interested in an annual statement where Russia and China are amongst the parties issuing that declaration. It's just not believable what you're telling me. I won't even talk about India, Brazil, and South Africa. It's just not believable that the European Commission would ignore an annual statement where Russia and China are amongst those issuing that statement together. When BRICS started, it was an economist who devised that acronym, because he said that those were the countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, those were the four ones. And then they themselves, 1 year later, decided to ask South Africa to join them. But when it started, it was a kind of, let's take that guy at his word. He's putting us together. Let's see what happens if we actually sit together. And one thing people forget is that for a country like Brazil, going back to your question, for Brazil too, BRICS is most important in the economic sphere, because in the end, those are very different countries. And I'm not even talking about the expansion that we had last year, where the membership doubled. China and India have very political divergent, and they even have a border conflict, latent border conflict. Those are very different countries with politically different objectives. They have one political objective in common, to make the global south have a louder voice. And BRICS is a means towards achieving that. So yes, often countries join and the group. I remember 20 years ago when the Doha round of negotiations in Geneva was still active. Some countries, not only developing ones, Australia was an important member of that group, created an agricultural G20. Yeah. And that's done for. I mean, you never hear about it anymore. It was created because at that moment it was useful for those countries to sit together and present a common objective to the other countries. So it's normal that coalitions are formed and that groupings are formed, and then the countries in the end lose interest or their interests are too divergent. But I would say that BRICS has been very successful. In fact, so many countries around 40 countries want to join BRICS at the moment. That's a sign of success. Countries see something in BRICS that they want to be part of.
Right. Thank you. I'd like to go back to the audience. Anybody have a question that they would like to ask? This gentleman at the back. Can we take maybe one more as well? We'll take 2 questions on the go. Anyone else? And yep, gentleman there. Yes, please. Yeah, if you can come forward, or if your voice is on. Sorry, the cable is on. We'll invest in a cordless one.
Hello, I'm Gautam. I'm from the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. We're also based inside Sunway. A couple of questions, actually. So first was, you did mention and you gave a really brief note about the convergences that are between Malaysia and Brazil. I just wanted to get your perspective and your expert perspective on if there are any disagreements or bottlenecks that could possibly prevent the potential of an expansive collaboration between Brazil and Malaysia on that. I had a second question in mind, but I forgot that in the moment right now. So if I think about it, I'll come back to it.
Just let us know. And maybe we'll take, yes. Okay, yep. It's not long enough, but you either come forward or you can.
Your Excellency, thank you very much on very good presentation. I have 2 questions. BRICS.
Just for the record, please say your name and where you're from.
Mirza from Malaysia, Bosnia Business Chamber. BRICS has Brazil, China, India, Russia, Indonesia recently joined, so almost all population in the world. So when we look at ratio for those people who are thinking that joining BRICS is not good, a ratio of those who are going to retaliate possibly against the BRICS is 1/22. I've calculated, I've read about that. So one guy threatening 22 guys with tariffs, with possible retaliation and so on. Do BRICS really needs to fear of the retaliation, and does BRICS has the power to, in the case that something really rise up, that retaliate on their own? So this is a little bit, tricky question. Another one, we are talking about joining BRICS benefits. Now Malaysia has deficit with Brazil. Malaysia has deficit with China. Malaysia has a deficit with mainly countries from the BRICS. I'm not sure whether Malaysia has studied whether joining BRICS will be a positive or negative move when it comes to FDI, when it comes to finances, economic benefits, and so on. What is your opinion on that? Thank you.
So we will wait for your question.
Is it going to take us now or the next round?
Okay, I'll do the next round. Sure.
Yes, the easy question first. No, I don't foresee in the short term or even the middle term that Malaysia and Brazil would reach a situation where their divergences would be so big that they would not be able to increment their relations. I don't foresee that at all. In fact, even before Lula became president and Anwar Ibrahim became prime minister, the level of convergence in positions between Brazil and Malaysia in international fora, the UN, for example, any committee within the UN, and was very strong. We vote more or less the same often on several issues. And that was even before Lula became president and Anwar Ibrahim became Prime Minister of Malaysia. So I don't foresee that the divergence would be so high that everything I said would turn out to be too optimistic and just silly on my part. I don't foresee that. Absolutely not. As I said, I mean, in political life, things change very quickly, but in the short term and the mid term, I don't foresee that. As for your question, I believe that Malaysia's interest in BRICS started with an interest in the BRICS Bank, the new development bank. When I was in Brazil, as a matter of fact, on holiday in June last year, when the Prime Minister announced on June 14th that it wanted Malaysia to join BRICS. And in Brazil, some people told me, but was that a surprise for you? And it wasn't, because for many months before that, Malaysian officials had requested me information on the new development bank, the BRICS Bank, based in Shanghai. You don't need to be a member of BRICS in order to join the BRICS Bank. And Malaysia has declared an interest in joining BRICS, but so far, no particular interest in joining the BRICS Bank. But I believe the BRICS Bank is actually, the BRICS Bank is beginning, right? It has been around for about 10 years. But it's bound to increase its participation in financially in the world. For example, last year when we had the very severe floods in the south of Brazil, the BRICS Bank announced a huge amount of money to help those populations in the south of Brazil, because several infrastructure works are going to be necessary. So the World Bank is already loaning money to developing countries in better conditions than the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. So that's one aspect of BRICS that one has to take into account. I'm not sure whether that was your full question or whether it was something else.
I think we also thought theoretically, since BRICS represents such a big number of the world population, if there's a need to split, is there kind of like split?
Oh, BRICS 1, BRICS 2, BRICS 3? Is that what you mean?
No, like BRICS versus everyone else.
No, but as I said, there's no such thing as BRICS and everyone else.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And by the way, with something that you mentioned, I don't see President Donald Trump as targeting BRICS in particular. He's threatening tariffs on everyone. He's not targeting, as I said, he's been talking a lot, even before his swearing in. He talked a lot about European Union, about Mexico, about Canada, about Greenland, about Denmark. He never said anything about Russia and China. I don't think now he's beginning to talk about China, but I don't think he's targeting BRICS or the BRICS countries in particular.
In fact, this morning, the headline was he and the president of Denmark had a very heated conversation. Yeah, but you're right in that sense. Yeah. All right, so we've got about 10 minutes left. Final round. Yizhen, would you like to start?
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for this insightful talk. I have two questions, one on BRICS and one on Brazilian-Malaysian relationship. Okay, so on BRICS, right, I was inspired by your comment earlier on that you mentioned that certain blocks, they come into fruition to serve the need of the time of those particular members, right? So looking forward ahead, what do you think BRICS members need to do to ensure that the BRICS bloc continues to stay relevant for the time to come, given the potentially changing global order that we see today? That's number one. And number two, if you had a magic wand, political bottlenecks and everything else aside, what would be the one cooperation or agreement that you'd love to see between Brazil and Malaysia that would be most impactful for both countries?
Let's take one more as well. You guys ready? I'll take this mic.
Yeah. Right, so- Hi, Your Excellency. Good evening. I'm Idris. I'll end this evening off with just a very light-hearted, quick question. Might be a bit sensitive. So, in your opinion, as a Brazilian, this is a two-parter. One, is there any decent place for Brazilian food here in KL? And two, are there any places that you'd recommend for Brazilian food as well? Thanks.
Could I answer his question first? Okay. Well, there are 2 or 3 Brazilian restaurants in town. One of them is the one I know. It's called Samba on Avenue K.
That's a good one.
And it's as good as you can get. It's a meat restaurant. I'm a Brazilian who doesn't particularly like meat, but sometimes I take Malaysian friends there, and it's as close as you can have to a very typical kind of meat restaurant we have in Brazil, which is a Brazilian cultural institution, which is all kinds of meat served in succession on skewers. And you're sitting there and the meat comes to you, all kinds of different meats, and you just say which ones you want. You may not wish the one that's coming that particular moment. It's just like an international coalition, you know? But then you may wish the following one. So I would recommend that restaurant. I'm afraid the meat they serve is not Brazilian. I think it's Australian. But the way it's cooked and the way it's presented is as close to the real thing in Brazil as you can get it anywhere abroad. Not only in Malaysia, but anywhere else in the world. You know, when you asked your second question about the issue that yes, Brazil and Malaysia, the first thing that came to my mind was health. The first thing that came to my mind, because there's so much we can do together, because tropical countries suffering from the same tropical diseases, and we are together in, for example, the Dengue Alliance. Brazil and Malaysia participate in something that's called Dengue Alliance. And I think there's a lot we can do together in the field of health. And as a matter of fact, at this particular moment, bilateral agreement is being negotiated between our 2 ministries of health. In fact, it's nearly ready to be signed. And when Lula comes for the ASEAN summit, surely he will have a bilateral with Dato Siriano Ibrahim. And I believe that's going to be in October, if I remember correctly. And that's one agreement that I think the 2 sides will sign. It's really ready to be signed. And that's the first thing that came to my mind, health. And there was a nasty question about BRICS. Could you repeat it?
What members need to do to stay relevant?
So far, we haven't had the need to do anything because, as I said, every year new countries declare that they want to join BRICS. BRICS, in the end, yesterday I was having dinner at the Indian High Commission, and there were some Malaysian friends at that dinner, and one of them asked me, is the acronym going to change now that the membership has doubled? Why? And that person said, I hear someone saying that maybe BRICS should change its name to iBRICS because of Indonesia, iBRICS. No, there's no need for that, because in the end, BRICS has become, it's not an acronym, in my opinion, okay? It's not an acronym anymore. It's a brand. It's become a brand. So when you say BRICS, thoughts come to mind. Everyone has their own ideas about BRICS, good or bad, or positive or negative, but BRICS has become a brand. So it doesn't need to change it. It doesn't mean Brazil, Russia, China, India, South Africa anymore. It means BRICS, it's a brand. So occasionally some BRICS members will try to politicize the summit, right? To kind of have inserted in the summit declaration, the leader summit declaration, some political topic, which is a little bit difficult, but it's in that particular country's interest. But then the other countries will react, will ponder, will convince the country not to insert that paragraph. So normally, even the BRICS members themselves, they try to make BRICS as little political as possible, I think. Brazil, certainly.
Thank you. We've got a few more minutes, and I want to just very quickly get your thoughts. I'll be remiss if I didn't ask about education. Malaysia and Brazil prioritize education as being a great equalizer, advancer of society. We see a lot of young people here in the audience today, and we talk about youth leadership for the future. I mean, this will be the generation that succeeds BRICS, ASEAN in that regard. What are your thoughts on, I suppose, the leadership that you may have seen in Malaysia or education and the role that it will play in time to come?
That's something that in the mind of Dr. Siriano Ibrahim. Often when he meets Brazilian officials, he talks about education with President Lula. It's not in the final declaration, but that was mentioned between them when my foreign minister came to Malaysia in August last year and paid a courtesy visit on the Prime Minister. He mentioned education, but so far very little has been done about it. I can't say that it's one of the most dynamic areas, but it's definitely in the mind of Malaysia.
Okay. Last question. That's okay. Yeah. So on Liu Chin-tong, our Deputy Minister of International Investment, Trade and Industry, he says, Ambassador Ary is one of the most intellectual and literary diplomats I've ever met over the past 2 decades in Kuala Lumpur. We became friends in late 2020 as COVID-19 lockdowns were being lifted. Do you feel the same way about him? No. Last chance. Anyway, no.
It's a reciprocal friendship, I can tell you that.
Blessed. So my question, to end with is, you've been here for 5 years, almost 5 years, and you've done so many things. Culture. You've been a diplomat, but also somewhat even an ambassador for Malaysia. As you prepare to leave the country, what are the thoughts on the legacy you've built? I know people often don't like to talk about their own legacies, but what would you leave looking back and saying, I'm glad that I've been here to do this? And on a more personal note, what will you miss most about Malaysia?
Recently, at a farewell party that was given to me, and you were invited to that party, but you couldn't make it, I said the following, that ambassadors often, when they leave, they like to talk about their achievements. I did this and this and this for bilateral relations. And recently, a Bernama journalist asked me, what's your biggest achievement in 5 years? And I answered, Anwar Ibrahim's visit to Brazil in November last year. And she turned to me and said, I thought you would say the Burle Marx book. And I found that very interesting because, in fact, she's right in a way, because the Burle Marx book, and I think you've heard me say this before, Daniel, what diplomat, and I hope the 2 foreign diplomats who are here will agree with me, although they are entitled not to agree with me. Being a diplomat is a very disappointing job in many respects, because the work you do, you won't see concrete results immediately. Often you work tirelessly, and the result will appear years after you've left the country. You plant a seed, for example, the European Union. And Timo worked so hard as the deputy of the European delegation here. Many of the seeds that you plant, the European Union has so many cooperation projects in Malaysia. The results, education, for example, it's not, let's have a cooperation in education, and in 6 months we'll have changed the way Malaysians and Europeans or Brazilians see education together. It's not like that. It takes sometimes generations, but certainly years. And so that Bernama journalist, in a sense, was right, because the Burle Marx book, I should have brought a copy. We are run out of copy. We have one left at the embassy. We should have brought that copy. It's a very tangible result of our work here, because it's a physical object that you can peruse, that you can read, that you can think about, and it says a lot about Brazil and Malaysia. The park says a lot about Brazil and Malaysia. It's an example, as I said, of the cooperation between Brazil and Malaysia, as Malaysia went all the way to Rio to hire the most famous at the time landscaper in the world, Burle Marx, to design KLCC Park. And by coming here, even though he was ill, and he went to Kota Kinabalu, he went to Negeri Sembilan, he went to Perak, I think, not only to Kuala Lumpur. even though he had cancer and had just a few months of life. But he made this effort and he designed such a typical Brazilian park, but with plants from Malaysia. That's the biggest visual demonstration of integration between the two countries that you could have. So maybe that journalist is right. Maybe the book being so tangible as a result of my presence here is a good result of my time here. But if you ask me, as I think you did, what am I going to miss the most when I leave Malaysia in 2 weeks? And I can answer very succinctly, the people of Malaysia. Because really, it's difficult to find a country where the people are so kind, so generous, so warm-hearted. And, you know, when you arrive and people, they know you're a foreign diplomat. They know that you're going to leave after a few years. So they kind of protect themselves against pain by not really, they're friendly to you, but they don't really want to be too close to you because they know they're going to suffer when you leave. Malaysians don't do that. They are just not scared of giving out their hearts. It's pretty amazing. I've never seen this anywhere else in the world. It's so in the end, it's the most valuable thing I'm taking out of Malaysia is friendship.
Thank you very much, Ary. Beautiful answer. A round of applause. And on that note, I believe we have come to the end of our conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.